big welcome to our live audience for Digital Health Investor Talk. I'm your host, Stephen Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies address issues around growth, fundraising, trade sales, and strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me on x.com/Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of where can healthcare best use AI? And our guest is Chad Pytel. Chad is the founder and CEO of thoughtbot, which helps companies design and build successful digital products. Our show is being recorded and will be included in my podcast series called The Digital Health Investor Talk Show. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave us a review. We always love getting 5-star reviews. We have a new podcast links for the show, and so make sure that you see recent episodes when you subscribe on Apple and Spotify, or you could be subscribing to our old pages for the old podcast. This is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. Here's the format of today's show. It's 90 minutes long, and Chad and I will spend the first half discussing the news and the macro picture and other topics like that. And then for the second half, we're going to focus on our special topic of the day. And we'll be taking your questions throughout the show in the LinkedIn text chat. So, Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Steve, and hi to everyone out there who's watching and listening.
And can you introduce yourself to our audience? Our audience is young company leaders in digital health and investors and also senior executives and service professionals. And just tell us about yourself that's relevant from that perspective.
Yeah. So I am a web and mobile application designer and developer. And 21 years ago, I founded thoughtbot. And we are a consulting and digital design and development agency that helps products of all sizes go from concept to launch or to improve on an existing product. And so not only are we doing a lot of AI development today, but across web and mobile applications. For 21 years now, we've been helping businesses grow, launch, and improve.
Thank you. So we'll move on to macro news first. So here we talk about index levels, inflation, interest rates, jobs, and unemployment. So the stock market continues to be at roughly record highs. You had a pull-in for a couple of reasons in recent days. One was that the launch of the Chinese AI product DeepSeek caused a pull-in of AI-related stocks, which turn out to matter a lot to the NASDAQ. And then you had another pull-in from fears of a tariff war around Trump and his policies with the US and Canada and China. Nevertheless, the NASDAQ is at 19.7 thousand, which is near an all-time high. It's been a bit turbulent. It was bouncing back today. So, and I think what people are looking for is the next Fed meeting, which is going to be March 18th to 19th, and the Fed will be taking into account the Fed has said that it is in a cutting cycle, and we welcome that very much as the innovation economy and healthcare. We want the Fed to cut rates, and that's going to be very good for us. But the Fed has been less enthusiastic about cutting rates recently, and they're going to look at things like, and namely that's because of concerns about inflation. And so the Fed will look at CPI numbers, they'll look at labor numbers before they make their decision March 18th to 19th for their next meeting. And I know that for the last week, people have been very concerned that a tariff war means that that there will be concerns about the CPI, and that means the Fed will decide in March to not cut rates. That has been the concern. But now the tariff war seems to have gone away, perhaps, except that it's actually on a 30-day pause with each country. So, Chad, any reaction to that, or are there macro figures that you follow? And in general, we want to see the economy boom. We want to see index levels go up, and we want to see the Fed cut rates as the innovation economy. So,
yeah, I saw today. There's still companies that, even though there's been the 30-day sort of stay, they're companies that are affected by things. And I saw a few startups announcing layoffs and shutdowns, they're trying to fundraise and then are manufacturing across Canada and the US, and they're having to shut down. So regardless of what happens, or lay people off because of the uncertainty and the inability to fundraise. So, and I think this is generally applicable in healthcare too. I think a big portion of imports and exports are actually medical. And so it's not a good situation, even though there has been the 30-day stay. And I think it's going to affect things. If I suspect that if I had to make a call, I don't think interest rates are going to be lowered. But that's just me making a call.
Yeah, interesting. Well, our audience likes that if you actually make a call on this, and we all know that the information keeps changing, and I think Henry Kissinger once said that predictions are difficult, especially about the future. But and for our audience, by the way, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Very interesting. The digital health world is in a challenging place right now because a lot of the employment. So I tend to focus on what I call the innovation economy, which is young, innovative companies and the VCs who back them. The rates went up 3 years ago, big time. The fundraising environment got weak. And then young companies were told to belt tighten, which meant that they take their top line growth rate maybe from 60% down to 10%. And then they are trying to make it to cash flow break even or to live on the cash pile they have left. And they're running out of that cash right now. And so we may see, but often they have enough to not have a visible problem from the outside, but it's not looking good inside. And so I have not seen any shut down and claim it was because of a tariff war. This is software digital health companies. That's often because they're overwhelmingly selling, as software companies selling into healthcare, they're overwhelmingly selling in the US, selling to US buyers. So we'll see. I'm sure there are German software companies selling to US buyers, and they may be affected by a 10% tariff on EU goods, for example, coming up. So very interesting. Thanks. So then the next topic, and for our audience, would love to have you chime in with macro issues. And we're actually going to add a new section here, which is politics and just what news from politics affects healthcare. And of course, we're representing the innovation economy of young healthcare software companies selling into the big budgets of healthcare. And a lot of those big budgets of healthcare are strongly affected by the economy and by government spending. And so here in politics, we have that RFK Jr. got a key senator to flip his direction, and that allowed him to clear the Senate Finance Committee. And that usually means that he's likely to be confirmed. News is still breaking. I haven't seen news saying that he's been confirmed yet. Maybe someone in the audience could chime in. So that, I know pharma has strongly opposed that. The research establishment inside of NIH has strongly opposed that in general. And so thinking about what this could mean. So one thing is that RFK has talked about banning pharma from direct-to-consumer advertising. So that's really bad for healthcare advertising, which is actually an industry. That's the world of WebMD, that sort of thing. And it also means that pharma thinks it'll take a hit to revenue on drugs where consumer choice matters, where consumer input matters. And that means that those pharma commercial groups are going to feel poor and they're not going to want to spend on tech. So that's another issue there. And so then there's also government research. You could see that the world of government research has had a lot of stasis, a lot of conservatism, which is to say that the same people in government often give grants to the same people in academia for basic research. And you can praise this for producing breakthroughs, but you can also criticize it because a young researcher out of a hot lab at Caltech has to can't just start their own lab and get money for it, has to spend 15 years, paying their dues and networking before they can start getting federal grants or whatever. And so, but with RFK, you might see a large scale breaking of prior patterns and establishing of new patterns of research, saying that old pathways weren't valuable, and then shifting that funds to new areas. And that is probably going to be disruptive in the sense that the commercial side of that picks up after research has been marinating for a long time. And so if RFK picks new areas like nutrition to focus on in basic research, then that means that areas ready for commercialization won't get their next grants, but areas that could be ripe for future commercialization will start to get grants, but that won't turn into commercial prospects for 5 years or 10 years, so there might be a gap there. Anyway, these are just some fun. And then you may see a review. This is not just RFK, there's also Doge. And so
Right.
you may see Doge say, we're going to target to take 25% of costs out of this and call certain government healthcare spending waste or too low priority to spend, or even call it or legitimate fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, everyone's always trying to cut fraud. Maybe they'll have better luck. So, and then this in turn, combined with other cutting measures, actually, the way the economy works is this stuff is actually boosting the economy. You could say that waste is bad, for example, but it's actually boosting the economy. And so when you take it away, that's good in general.
Right.
And it might mean that your debt goes down and your interest rates go down. That's good. But in the terms of 6 months to a year, it means that the people who got that cash aren't respending it. They're not paying mortgages with it. They're not buying groceries with it. They're not buying their next car with it or whatever. And so it can actually reduce your GDP in the short term, while, waste, fraud, and abuse is never good. And so while helping in the longer term. So those are just some considerations coming out of politics. Certainly we're getting a lot of political news right now of people whose projects are being cut, who are very, very upset about it. So Anyway, Chad, any thoughts on reaction to that or other thoughts on politics?
Well, I think you're right. You also just, you alluded to a long-term impacts or negative side effects to, even if you're doing what you think is the right thing. It's hard to look at the number of the government is the largest employer. It's hard to look at the number of layoffs being or buyout packages being offered and to say, if this turns into a lot of people being out of work, what happens when those buyout packages have run out? And 8 months from now, when people are looking for new jobs or are unable to find them, there's going to be big potential economic impacts to that if that's the case. And it's hard to look at the situation with each of these new leaders of these agencies coming in and making pretty disruptive reductions, potentially. And to say, well, that's going to be not have some consequences for each of the departments where it's happening. And so much, like you said, NIH is so much funding for research and everything comes from that. So I think it's going to be pretty big of an impact.
And just to give people an idea, so I've heard a lot of speculation about, get this, the real estate market in Northern Virginia.
Right.
So many of these people that we're hearing about who have, 1,000 people cut from the EPA or something like that, they might have had a job with $150,000 salary that could help them afford a single family home and a mortgage in Northern Virginia. And now they can't afford that anymore. And so that's a family level crisis for them. So they go into a job market that is not a strong job market right now. And then their house goes on the market into a house market where who's buying houses in Northern Virginia right now? Is there a new class of tens of thousands of people who suddenly have money to buy single family homes in Northern Virginia is going to step up and do that? Or is it going to be catching a falling knife? Is it going to be all sellers and no buyers? With an event like this, it feels like it's going to be all sellers and no buyers. And so that can happen in healthcare as well, where suddenly people are selling and there's no buyers in healthcare. So,
and I think that why this is important from an investing standpoint and entrepreneurial and innovation standpoint is we've seen what a lackluster, bad sort of economy from a startup perspective looks like. That's been the last 2-3 years, and if that continues, it's no good for any of us.
So that's the making sense of the politics for not just healthcare but the innovation economy of healthcare. Great, thank you. So next is business news and trade journal news, and here I like to focus on things like fundraisers. And what can we learn from recent fundraisers? So the first thing I noticed is that there's not a lot of fundraisers happening so far. We're in early February. And I actually, on prior shows, I mentioned that was my conclusion from the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, was that a lot of people said it's time to see an uptick in fundraisers. It's got to happen soon. It's going to happen now. And I wasn't seeing it at that conference. I wasn't seeing, and I would say a significant uptick would be an increase by 25% in the number of deals that are at A, B, and C in digital health.
Mm-hmm.
and or I'm sorry, rather seed A and B in digital health. And I wasn't seeing that at the time, or the view that it was going to happen within the next 1 to 2 quarters at JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. And now it's February, and we're looking at announced deals, and there haven't been a lot, and they haven't been from the mainstream funds as well. So that means that people who are announcing deals are getting them from some other sources. And so one of them is Zest Health. So Zest Health is a virtual care company that treats patients with inflammatory skin disease, and they raised $14 million in seed funding from Roivant Health, which incubated the company. So that means they didn't go into the marketplace to find a mainstream Series A or seed investor. They were incubated by their investor. So very interesting. The CEO there, congratulations, is Olivia Deiter in Washington, D.C. That's interesting because this is a care company. So we usually, overwhelmingly in the past, VCs wanted to invest in software companies, but a growing number are liking and looking at care companies. So care companies, a key difference is that care companies can't scale as fast. They're offering literal care. They're not selling software into the big budgets of healthcare. They're selling care through the healthcare system, either direct to consumer or through providers oftentimes, but they can often get to profitability faster. And there's a thesis that in healthcare, you're going to see a good mix of strong growth plus high margins that will give it venture-like returns, a lower risk profile and venture-like returns that would make it attractive for venture investors. Otherwise, historically, venture investors have not invested in services or care. Somebody else, they leave a different asset class to invest in services and care. So, and then I'll mention Affinion Health raised $5 million. This is an AI-powered inbox for providers and CEOs that simplifies provider workflows and lessens administrative burdens. And here, GB Ventures, which I hadn't heard of before, that's unusual, they led the round. There, the CEO is David Norris in Denver. So this is an AI company that is focused on workflow automation and cutting administrative burdens. That's the sweet spot of the market right now. But it's not. I don't see it being focused on clinical, which is much harder when it comes to AI. So this is in the white hot category right now, and they've managed to raise a $5 million seed round. So congratulations, David Norris there. So any thoughts on these two deals?
Well, I think you're right, and it's there's two sides to everything, but this idea that building profitable businesses in a way that it hasn't been traditionally done, and if it's in these service companies, that is great. Well, then if a company is able to do that, at what point do they actually need funding? And maybe what we'll see, and this is sort of the optimistic take, is that we'll start to get these successful companies that need to raise less money. And then those present really good investment opportunities, but it's a very different kind of sort of outlook for those companies. You're no longer just operating them at a loss in order to scale. If they can scale because it is, they're making revenue every time they provide service to somebody, and they're not doing that at a loss, that's a really great investment opportunity potentially, and to bring more to more people. I also think what I hear when I talk to our clients who are in these spaces, and we have several of them, it's really good to work on these kinds of things and be involved in these kind of things, because providing actual services to people and care to people it feels good to be involved in those kinds of businesses. So just speaking personally, like when our team is working on we love all our clients, but when our team is working on a thing where they can do a user interview with someone who was just helped in their home buy the product that we helped build, that's really exciting as well. So
yeah, thank you. That is a great characteristic of digital health, which is that a third or more of our workforce is cause motivated. So they're here because of change. They're here to make impact. They're here to do great things in business. But they also, you talk to them, and they're at a diabetes company because they have a sister with type 1 diabetes, and they want to cure it forever, for everyone, forever. So that's a big factor in digital health. So I'll add to that part of that story of the care company or the services company in that is a startup, that is venture backed. Part of that is the belief that healthcare is kind of a uniquely strongly regulated sector, and that regulation is bad for outsiders, good for insiders, and amounts to a kind of a protection for insiders. And that means you can have high margins and you're not just going to be wiped out tomorrow by a hot Korean software company or something. And then so that there's the protection there. And there's also a belief that the white coats, which is the clinicians, the doctors, are some of the world's worst business people. So there's an opportunity for the technologist to step in and run it better somehow. And an example of that might be One Medical Group. So before One Medical Group, there'd almost never been like a nationwide primary care medical practice that had a very strong software component to engage with patients and that did these neat contracts with elite employers like Adobe software or Google software that helped that attracted executives from those to want to be at one, to want to get their care at One Medical or whatever. And I visited One Medical in their early days when they had 300 software developers in a building in San Francisco in their early days, and who were working out the best way to have an electronic front office, an electronic custom EMR for the company. No doctors are sitting around saying, how do I raise money to hire 300 software developers in a building in San Francisco to build a nationwide branded medical practice? So there's tips about consumerism and about branding and about technology that these other entrepreneurs have to offer when they get into this healthcare space. And so I call it the battle between the black turtlenecks versus the white coats.
We've worked on a number of care companies and other health tech companies that are sort of a beautiful pairing between a medical doctor who has an idea, sees a problem, begins to think about how to solve it, and partners with a co-founder who's more on the business side of doing things. One of those is a company that was acquired by One Medical, and actually, I feel like I should disclose One Medical is one of our clients. So, but that is it's a really awesome pairing when it works.
Thanks, and we're going to have Amir Dan Rubin, who was the CEO of One Medical when it went public and when it was sold to Amazon, as a guest on our show coming up. So next is Bicycle Health, which offers a virtual opioid disorder treatment. They raised 16.5 million Series C from Questa Capital. I know Questa Capital well, and that's often seen as a growth equity fund, and for a Series C, with participation from Frist Cressy. Frist Cressy is often seen as growth equity or private equity, and Signal Fire. The CEO there is Anik Gupta. Congrats, Anik. So this is another care company as well, Bicycle Health, virtual care for opioid disorder. It makes a lot of sense. Some people are going to be best treated in a bricks and mortar building. Other people are going to be best treated by having some sort of virtual care plan for them.
So,
and then,
they were also a client of ours. I feel like lots of disclosures, but really solid product. And actually, what these companies, we have another client in the space as well, past client in the space. The outcomes for patients are just as good, if not better, than the in-person treatment centers, and that's. They found that many of them needed to shut down during COVID and still deliver care. So they scrambled to pull together solutions and keep things going, but they cared a lot about outcomes, as any good sort of health tech company should. And the outcomes are just as good, if not better, with virtual care.
And then Noom confirmed in the press layoffs. And so it said it needs to focus on critical areas of the business and have a more efficient business model. And they said their revenue is shifting toward GLP-1 related areas, including Noom's product called Noom GLP-1 RX and Noom GLP-1 Companion. So this is really interesting because this area of GLP-1s, which is the category of drug of these incredible weight loss drugs, this is a very hot area that was one of the two hottest areas at JP Morgan, along with generative AI in January. And every single healthcare business that is in the world of obesity, weight loss, diabetes, metabolic, and other areas has to figure out what to do about these drugs. And I've even heard that you're going to see this used in sleep apnea next. And there's other kinds of addiction in here. You could say that obesity is a kind of a food addiction, but it's being used for other kinds of addiction, possibly sleep apnea, other things like that. So really interesting to have a drug like this. And unfortunately, so big picture, for those for whom it works without side effects, this is a marvelous boon to have a drug that works that has these effects. That's very good. Now, the vast majority of the value around this is going to go to the drug maker, which is not a digital health company. It's a pharma manufacturing company like Novo Nordisk in Denmark. By the way, apparently Novo Nordisk is so incredibly profitable. This has been a giant boon for the entire country of Denmark. But now that means that if you were a software company and you had major software programs around diet, exercise, fasting, weight loss, diabetes management, type 1, type 2 reversal, etc. Now you have to deal with the fact that the attention has shifted away from your software programs and onto GLP-1s. With GLP-1s, the price went up, but most of the value went to the pharma company, not to you. And so Noom was known for their outstanding diet software program, and now it looks like, I'm reading between the lines here to say that some of those customers who pay $40 a month for out of pocket for Noom found that maybe they could get reimbursed GLP-1 drug access, and so they want to shift to they might drop Noom, or they might take that drug with a Noom companion app. So that's an interesting area, and we see the hottest trend at JP Morgan reflected in Noom's recent announcement. I also have heard two jokes about this. One is that the hottest new lifestyle recreational drug coming out of San Francisco is GLP-1s. They gave us pot, they gave us LSD, and now they're giving us GLP-1s. And then the other one is that every single healthcare story is a GLP-1 story. That was the other kind of joke I heard. So you can sort of play a Kevin Bacon game of there's an announcement by Johnson & Johnson. Oh, well, if you link it to this and link it to this, now that's actually a GLP-1 story or something. So anyway.
Well, I think, what you see is a lot of companies in certain spaces saying, we've got to integrate, what's our AI story? We've got to integrate AI. I think you see a lot of companies that have been around for a while in the weight management space saying, how do we incorporate this into our offering or our practice, and then new products coming up, because you can do intake and subscription and that kind of thing in the same way as you might do with hymns and that kind of thing, that offering. So yeah, there's also, didn't PitchBook say like Noom was ready to IPO recently or something?
Yes. Well, I don't know if PitchBook did, but they're definitely included in a list of companies likely to IPO for a number of reasons, either rumored or that they have sort of. So I'm noticing that, yeah, in fact, I have a note here that Noom was among some. So PitchBook said ZocDoc, Row, Hinge, Omada, Color, Everly, Noom, Zira, Devoted, Somatus. Within that, Row also would be strongly affected by GLP-1s. And so with Noom, I would expect if they can figure out how to make GLP-1s a growth story, they could still IPO. But if it eats away at their value, then this is a blow to their thoughts of IPO, I would guess.
Yeah, or not to be conspiracy theory, but maybe there is part of this story is GLP-1, but also if they are preparing or looking towards IPO, then cutting staff to become more profitable might be another thing that maybe push them over the edge in terms of doing it.
Yeah, and it's interesting here. So with GLP-1s, this was if there's limited supply of GLP-1s, there's a limited number of them, they can sustain a high price in the marketplace, then that means that any companion you wrap around it or program you wrap around it is not going to be able to charge that much. There'll be a price for this, and the companion, the drug manufacturer will have market power, and the companion will not be able to charge a lot around it. You could imagine a future where there's 10 slightly different versions of this drug. All of them are generic. There are versions that are pill-based or derm-based as opposed to injection-based. And at that point in time, the program you wrap around it might add all the value for it. But we seem to be at a stage where the market value is going to be captured by the pharma manufacturer, not the program around it. Let's see. So then just some AI news. This is an AI topic show today, and there was some big AI news. So probably the first was that we've just seen a lot of attention around reasoning models for our audience. And for our audience, feel free to ask questions in the chat. people are familiar with that we used to have search engines, and we still do. And the result of a search engine like Google is it gives you 10 blue links. That's the result of a search engine. And then we started getting AI engines like the first OpenAI, ChatGPT. And that was an answer engine, and it would give you a 2-paragraph answer to your question. And I like Perplexity. Perplexity is still like that. And it gives search results. And I just find their business quality of search results and the way they put it on the screen makes it faster for me to analyze it. And I put Perplexity as the default search engine in my Chrome browser, meaning I don't have to take extra steps. But now there's reasoning engines, and reasoning engines will allow you to ask multi-part tough questions, and they will print out pages of answers where step by step they explain, I went out and I found this data, and I concluded this, and because of that, therefore, I'm going to the next step of the reasoning. And so these step by step reasoning models are getting a lot of attention, getting better. There weren't any a year ago. Now there's multiple ones. So then DeepSeek came out. This is a Chinese hedge fund released a software program that roiled markets and shocked the AI community because they claimed to have only spent a few $1 million building it, but it was almost as good as the second best OpenAI model, basically. But they also made it so it was also a reasoning model, and people have been marveling at it because you might ask it a question about, well, to pick a controversial example, you might ask it a question about Tiananmen Square, and then it would begin to print out stuff in English, and then it would mix in Chinese, seemingly and then it would censor itself because it was talking about Tiananmen Square. But it didn't censor itself up front. It got to a point where a rule applied and they had to censor itself or whatever. And so people are wondering what's going on with, is it bilingual? What does it mean to be a bilingual AI or something?
Yeah. It's just to chime in, it is worth noting that that's only on the one that's hosted in China. But the DeepSeek model is open weights. And so you can download the model. There's lightweight versions of it, and you can run it entirely on your device, or you can host it yourself. And when you get the model from them and run it yourself, it doesn't have any of that censoring built in. It was a layer on top of everything. So that's, and that's one of the reasons why people are really excited about DeepSeek in general, is because it is open weights. And it can run on device, which you can't do with OpenAI. OpenAI, their reasoning steps are private. They consider that a trade secret. And so the fact that DeepSeek is open weights, it's a reasoning model, it shows its reasoning, and you have access to the reasoning. Sort of, there's been this age-old debate around AI. Is there a moat around OpenAI, or is what they're doing actually just going to be a commodity eventually that anyone can do? That's why the introduction of the latest version of DeepSeek moved the markets, because it showed potentially that is not that is the case, that people will be able to do this much cheaper, faster. It's sort of, I'm vindicated in a little bit because I've been saying all along that this is the case, because it's just computers. The current version of generative AI is just computers. And what do computers do? They get better, cheaper, and faster. We get better and cheaper and faster at doing them. So that's the direction I believe we're headed. It doesn't mean that OpenAI is not going to continue to innovate and stay at the front of the pack, but there will be things downstream from that.
Yeah, so lots of consequences of this. So one was that the live hosted site offered by the Chinese company behind DeepSeek, they were instantly lost the ability to provide this, first because millions of people around the world wanted to try it, and they did not have a giant server bank behind them. And then secondly, supposedly because foreign espionage companies were intentionally denying them service to prevent rapid uptake of the product, allegedly, the way that OpenAI had seen massively rapid uptake of its product. And so this was because there was so much attention given to this product. And then many people pointed out that when Elon Musk and Sam Altman co-founded OpenAI, it was intended to be open weights and a gift to the world. and a nonprofit. And now Sam Altman is trying to work out various ways to give himself $1 billion by taking it private and making it profitable. And so people are sort of joking that DeepSeek managed to do this. And finally, and like DeepSeek published a picture of the people who made the model, and it's a relatively small number of very young Chinese who were never educated in the West. And who are also hedge fund employees at the same time. And so people are wondering, did they pull the greatest short of all time by shorting NVIDIA basically, and then launching this product, knowing the effect it would have? And finally, China is in a race with the West. People are looking at this along national lines, and China is in a race with the U.S., and the U.S. is seen as being ahead. And so there's sort of two things China could do. And first of all, no one actually thinks that this is the state of China's AI. This is a hedge fund that was not on people's radar screens before. They did this with not a lot of money. It's not like the National University of China with the state of the people's, with the Chinese Communist Party is their official project or something. It's not that. But so instead of emerging with the best of all AIs to beat America, what they did was they threw in a super cheap AI to wreck the market, which it may have done. The jury is still out. But a lot of people are claiming that there's no moat around OpenAI, for example. But there would be a moat around a Google or a Microsoft or an Apple or an Oracle, because they host millions of people's data already. And so they can just say, here's our version that already knows all your data that you already store with us. And OpenAI can't do that because they don't have that, because they're a startup, they don't have that back end to them. So yeah, so that was anyway. So that was some. And then lastly, OpenAI announced a new product called Deep Research that is claiming that it can basically do what a sophisticated PhD in an expert field can do. So really interesting stuff. Any reflections on that, Chad, or other AI?
I wonder if Deep Research was going to have that name before DeepSeek came out, but it's actually really impressive. Have you checked it out?
I haven't, just because I don't have a great question to ask.
Okay. It can produce significant research results, including graphs and that kind of thing. And so it's definitely something to keep an eye out. I think it's, the concern with all these, and we're going to talk more about this later, is, the tendency to hallucinate, to make things up, to put together information that's inaccurate. And so that's really the kind of thing to watch for in this kind of solution.
There's a joke when it comes to generative AI models in the clinical side of healthcare involving the care delivery process, that there's a joke that they are black boxes that can't explain what they're doing and make things up. But other than that, though, they're great. So that's why using generative AI for administrative side stuff has been going like gangbusters, but there's been a lot of caution on applying it on the clinical side. And there's also a framework where probably you are not going to be taking the doctor out of the loop. So people think that the doctor is the expert, and he or she is, or the decision maker, and he or she is. But most of all, actually, the doctor is the person who is responsible. So the physician assistant is not responsible. The nurse is not responsible. The hospital CEO is not responsible for the patient care. The doctor is responsible for the patient care. And now the doctor is going to be responsible for the stent that they choose to use in a procedure, or for the titanium backbone part that they put in someone's back, and for the AI engine that they choose to use in analyzing a patient's radiology scan or something. So the doctor is the person who is responsible, and AI is not going to replace that. It's going to give the doctor another tool that may speed them up, that may do work for them they can't do, etc. So I'm going to skip some sections here and go on to upcoming conferences. So the big conference everyone is talking about right now is the ViVE conference in San Francisco. For those of you in our audience, feel free to throw questions about upcoming conferences or conferences you want to plug in the chat, and I'll bring them up on the show. So ViVE is coming up February 16th to 19th in San Francisco. ViVE is hosted by the same people who do the health conference in Las Vegas in October. ViVE is much more focused on it's focused on innovation for payers and providers, whereas health in Las Vegas is focused on all innovation in healthcare. And I like Vive. I've been to Vive, and some tricks about Vive. So you can probably go to a cafe outside the conference, not enter the conference, and just do meetings with people during the conference. And it will be strong on VCs and strong on your competitors and competitive information, but it's not necessarily very strong on attracting buyers of software. You'll find innovation executives from incumbents and consolidators, but not necessarily buyers of software. So I wouldn't exhibit. I wouldn't bother to get a 10 by 10 booth.
I think that's a helpful tip to early stage founders in the space as well. These conferences can be expensive. Just the tickets alone can be expensive, but a lot of times you can get value just by booking a plane ticket and hanging around the conference, telling people that you're there and let's grab coffee at this place. You can get almost as much value for certainly a lot less money than that. So that's a good tip, Steve.
And now would be a good time, write all of the VCs that you know or want to know and say, let's meet at Vive. And then they're trying to fill their calendar at Vive, and you're doing them a favor by offering, and they're in meeting mode. They're going to try to do 10 meetings a day at Vive, and they haven't filled those yet. And so you can get in their loop. So then also, I like the PM360 Spark Pharma Innovation Conference in New York City on February 24th. Which is a pharma innovation summit focused around the pharma commercial budget, marketing, brand managers, software sold into those people, that sort of thing. Chad, any thoughts on other conferences that our audience might want to know about?
Well, it's not specific to healthcare, but a thoughtbot's going to be at South by Southwest, and that's in March. And there's so much going on there all the time from all different kinds of companies. It's one of those things where it's like, South by Southwest is too big. Nobody goes anymore. It's like, no, pretty much everyone goes. And so we'll be there as well. But that's the kind of thing we don't have a booth. We're just there, being there, meeting people outside of the conference for lunch, for coffee, hosting an event, that kind of thing.
And South by Southwest has made an effort over the years to try to appeal to the pharma innovation and medtech innovation sectors. And so, and I know I have a friend who works in pharma innovation, and he hosts a party at South by Southwest with what are they called? The agencies. And agencies are always throwing around cash to throw parties at pharma ad agencies. But an approach to South by Southwest would be, you want to go to Austin to reach out to all the Austin-based digital health investors anyway. You might as well do it during South by Southwest. If they're in Austin, they're going to South by Southwest, and they're available for meetings during South by Southwest. And even if they aren't, they're in their offices, which are probably which are within 20 minutes of downtown Austin, and they'd be happy to meet you in their offices. So that's the time to go. And then there used to be this event, the whole event is like over 10 days long, but there used to be a South by Southwest Health, which was like 5 of those days. And so if that's true this year, then make sure it's in those 5 days.
Yeah, I don't know if it is, but South by Southwest is so big and so long, it can be hard to cut through the noise. And so, I think it's also good to set your expectations appropriately. Like if you're a new company, you're expecting to make a big splash, that's really hard to do. It's better to just network and meet people.
Yep. So now personal notices. So this is a chance for our audience to connect with you. And in my case, I'm hosting one of my Boston Health Innovation Nights on Wednesday, February 12th from 5:30 to 8:30 at the Liberty Hotel in Boston. And this will feature a speaker as Inside Tracker's Gil Blander on the topic of performance, health span, and longevity. So to register for that, you should go to stephenwardell.eventbrite.com. I'll be there. It'd be nice to meet you and chat with you. And Chad, do you have any personal notices for our audience?
It's much more technical than this show, but tomorrow I'm going to be live streaming, and we're actually going to do real development on the stream. And I have a locally running Ruby on Rails application that uses Llama 3 right now as its locally running LLM. And so live on the stream, we're actually going to replace that with DeepSeek, and we're going to compare the results that we get from both of them. And this is really relevant to The reason why we do this and we explore local models running locally that we can self-host is because then we don't need to deal with PHI and PII issues, because we're not sending data out to third parties if we can host everything ourselves and run everything locally. So if that's interesting to you, tune in. You can follow Thoughtbot on LinkedIn, and it'll be streaming on LinkedIn.
That's great. Thank you. And what a great opportunity. So the main topic of today's show, now we're moving on to that, and that is, where can healthcare best use AI? What are the new capabilities of modern AI, and where can they best be used in healthcare to solve problems? There's been a flurry of AI startups since the arrival of ChatGPT, and the sector is white hot with investors. What are the problem areas in healthcare that are amenable to the capabilities of generative AI? This would cover the capabilities of generative AI, the problem areas where AI can help and where startups are building products, and the obstacles that are keeping personal healthcare and the obstacles that are faced, like keeping personal healthcare data private. So, Chad, can you tell our audience about this?
Well, I think one of the things that's really been pretty exciting is when we think about what the capabilities of generative AI are, it's evolved very quickly. So when we think about how things were 2 years ago versus a year ago versus 6 months ago, what we're seeing is that problems where generative AI wouldn't have been applicable, you needed a different kind of AI capable of doing it just as well, if not better, as other things. So problems that would have maybe been traditionally done, oh, this is a classification problem and it's not well suited to generative AI, now become possible. And so what we're seeing at a lot of companies is there's just so many things that they could be applying AI to. Everyone's got their ideas. People are saying, and then at the board executive level, they're saying, what's our AI strategy? What are we doing? For early stage startups, you're getting a lot of pressure to incorporate AI into the product, even if it wasn't originally there for fundraising reasons or those kinds of things. So it can be pretty overwhelming, all of those different things. So that's sort of my opening statement. It could be pretty overwhelming. And so what we've been doing is we're bringing people together and stakeholders at companies, founders, whatever stage, and really doing a lightweight process to get all the ideas out, rate them in terms of impact versus effort, prototype them in one day, and then come out of that process saying, that's the thing that we should do right away. And it's going to be done next week or the week after. You can move very quickly with that process. But what we're finding when we do that, it's exactly what you alluded to earlier, which is the things that we gravitate towards in that process tend to be the administrative side of things, not the clinical side of things. And there are two reasons for that. One is the one that you'll use. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We had a flurry of interest of, how do people find out about the online thing you're doing tomorrow? Is there, if you tell me, I can put it in the chat for people.
Yeah, the best thing is to search for Thoughtbot on LinkedIn. Actually, if you go to, if you get the link, but it's not showing up for me. Probably because I'm Thoughtbot on LinkedIn.
So I'm looking.
Here it is. Here it is. So I dropped it into the chat on LinkedIn as well, the link to the event.
Oh, great. Thank you. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. The first reason why, when we plot impact versus effort and ability to get a strategy in place and execute quickly, we gravitate towards administrative versus clinical is the one that you said is the first reason, is the one you said. Clinical, it's a little bit fraught. You might have to go, you have questions around liability, responsibility, PHI, PI. You have questions around, is this going to produce good results? Like, we care a lot about outcomes and we need to show that it's going to produce good results. And then even if it is useful, you might need to go through regulations or at least be impacted by them. So that's the first reason why all these things, when you want to move quickly and do something, tends to gravitate towards administrative. The other thing that I've learned and seen companies grapple with is, when you have a product or an outcome, you might say, okay, if we apply AI to this, we'll be able to do this thing. Or maybe if you have a digital product, say, and you want to incorporate a user-facing AI feature, the chances that adding one new feature to your product moves the needle in a significant way for whatever metric you're going for, user signups or customer satisfaction or something like that, that's very hard to show with any product feature. But on the administrative side or the back office side, you know how much things are costing you. You know how much long something takes normally to do, or how much people time and effort and therefore cost would normally go into this activity. And you know the things maybe that you can't do because they would be too expensive to do now. And so if we can make those go faster or enable something internally that wasn't possible before at scale, the calculated ROI on, like, the ability to calculate the ROI on that is possible in a way that isn't possible with clinical or user-facing features. And so it's like, yes, do that, because it's going to unlock $100,000 in savings next year. It's really, and there's a fair amount of low-hanging fruit in that space. And so I think for those two reasons, that's what we see companies, when we really try to put something in place and make something happen quickly, they gravitate towards those.
At JP Morgan, there was a joke that slide presentations either have one bullet that say AI, a slide has up front has a single bullet that says AI, or there's 6 bullets and the 6th one says AI. And the difference between these two companies is one is more than 2 years old, and so it already had 5 bullets, and so AI is now the 6th bullet. The other one is less than 2 years old, and so it only has 1 bullet. 1 bullet point, and that's AI. But what are some of these? So we also didn't mention, when it comes to AI, we talked about the answer engine, and we talked about reasoning, and we talked about deep research, but we didn't talk about agents. So agents actually do things in the real world, like choose a flight, like search for and choose a flight on a different system and pay for it or something like that. And so those are actions. What are some of the things you're seeing on the administrative side of healthcare? I've heard of, for example, a product will help you get from clinical note to coding report faster with higher accuracy. That's one that there's a hot area around that right now, using deep learning AI or modern generative AI models. What are some other areas you're seeing that this applied to?
Well, even in that area, there's a sort of product thing where it's like, it's not generating it for you, right? Let's break this down a little bit. It's also about, like, we can do things with these solutions that were really difficult to do before. So, for example, taking a look at what someone's written and saying, oh, it's missing this piece of information or this code or whatever. Can you add it? It's not even about having the machine add it. It's just about reviewing something someone has done and then reminding them that they missed something or forgot something. Because you can say, here's what this should normally look at. Does it include everything that it's supposed to? What is it missing? And then you can present that to the back office person or the administrative person to be able to improve it. So it's not always about generating something new. It's about applying these tools to do something that might have traditionally been really difficult to do with programming and algorithms. And I think once you unlock that sort of possibility, it opens up a lot of different possibilities in the space. And then especially, so the other thing that we're seeing is multimodal generative AI allows us to give it PDFs or a bunch of PDFs and to be able to do things with them, scan documents. That's the kind of thing we're being able to. Traditionally, that would have been solved a very different way in terms of being able to process scanned or photographs of old documents and records. And now with multimodal, we're able to give a multimodal generative LLM that information and to be able to jump right to extracting and asking questions of those old records.
That's interesting. So in medicine, you could imagine, for example, a physician calls up prior medical notes, which might be in narrative format, and then can simply maybe verbally ask a question of those notes and get an answer. Whereas before they would have had in front of them the project of deciding how much time to spend reading prior notes, which could go on for quite some time.
Yeah.
To try to find that information.
Can we say people's names from the chat when we mention what they said?
Yes, I usually say just the first name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Daniel just said AI is a medical compliance and documentation tool. And that's definitely another use case, and a strong one is, a lot of organizations have these big repositories of non-clinical information. They could be processes, they could be how to file this paperwork, how to do this thing, how to talk to this insurance company, that kind of thing. And finding and accessing that information or compliance information, and being able to ask questions of that in a natural language way and get answers based on your own internal policies and procedures. People are doing that across industries. I think it's particularly relevant in healthcare just because there is so much, and it's non-clinical information. So it's pretty safe.
Yep. Thank you, Daniel. And for our audience, by the way, now's a great time for you to throw in your questions. And I see that Eric asked a question in revenue cycle management. He has seen that for every one clinician, there are 10 administrative and revenue cycle personnel. Could that be dropped to a lower ratio? So really great question. I haven't seen it looked at that way, but what I have seen is that so in healthcare, clinicians write medical notes, and then medical coders write coding reports and submit them to Bill. And it used to be that with the best technology 3, 4, 5 years ago, you could get about 40% of those medical notes using algorithms and other technologies could be converted to direct to Bill without going through medical coders, who in turn may have to go back to clinicians, which is a multi-day process to go back to clinicians and ask for more information. And so we've seen that boosted by generative AI from 40% to 80%, basically, and climbing. And so that means that there's only 20% left that have to go to a medical coder to be coded and then to possibly gather additional information. And you can actually build that into the process where someone's composing a medical note, and the system asks you by text or by voice, asks you, doctor, did you spend up to 15 minutes or 15 to 30 minutes with the patient or more? And that's a question that wouldn't be in a medical note, but it would matter for billing purposes under certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Or would you say this person's condition was minor or moderate or severe? And that can matter for billing purposes as well. So you might have had to go back to the clinician in a multi-day process to ask that question, but the AI agent that is simultaneously converting it to a coding report can do that in real time. So
one of the other things that generative AIs are getting very good at is converting unstructured information into structured information. That can be formats like JSON, can even be formats like FHIR, what we have in healthcare. So this is another reason where locally hosted, more lightweight models are very exciting, because all that stuff includes personal health information. You wouldn't necessarily have been able to send that to a third party and say, give me back FHIR format for this. But with a locally running model that you entirely control, that you're not concerned about the data being sent elsewhere, you can actually start to do that in a way. And I think that is going to unlock potential for certain products that haven't been possible before. Or rather, there are whole products that we've used on client projects where we have to do electronic medical record integration between two different systems. And there's whole companies that make their business of talking to different APIs and standardizing the schema down to particular and moving data between systems. Previously, you had to use one of those companies as a startup. You would basically have to use one of those companies because integrating with every EMR and munging data between them and that kind of thing is super expensive. If that becomes more possible to just do as part of your system that you're building yourself, that could be really powerful and disruptive to those sort of service providers that are providing that glue layer right now.
That's really interesting. So, there's a joke in healthcare that the greatest act of Apple's greatest contribution to healthcare could be to purchase Epic and then turn it off. And so, but where generative AI, and for Apple, by the way, that would be a very minor cash balance transaction for
So
Apple.
you're encouraging them to do it.
And so everyone's saying that their greatest contribution will be to create a beautiful device like a activity tracker for your wrist or something like that. And they're like, nope, their contribution is going to be to buy Epic and turn it off. But you could have, a way. It's very hard for someone to build an inpatient EMR that challenges Epic. But what if there was a challenge to Epic that came as an LLM instead? What if it was a different kind of platform and there was a different kind of integration where in a given day a physician never interacted with any EMR, and not with Epic or any other EMR, but interacted in a different way at a different level. And EMRs became a minor back end that could be swapped out by any database or something. That would be an interesting challenge to the EMR framework from LLMs. I don't know if you have a reaction to that.
Oh, I do. That's a super interesting idea. And I think that when you look at large established businesses, the model to go to is typically the disruption model. And so how does that typically happen? It happens at the low end, doing things that are not particularly a challenge to the larger enterprise. So they sort of ignore it, but it grows up from the low end in terms of capability and expands from there until it is a challenge. And so the opportunities in that space from a product or business perspective are probably where would the low end of that be? It might be solving that small problem that a small practice has, but then growing from there to be more disruptive.
So I want to. We have a bunch of audience questions, and in a moment we'll try to address more of those audience questions. But I wanted to ask, so you raised an interesting topic that I thought didn't matter, but you put some weight behind it. And so when I think of people in healthcare using LLMs, I'm imagining employees of hospitals, let's say, or possibly payers, and they are provisioned with a new tool in front of them. They used to be using a spreadsheet, and they used to look up data in a database, and now they're given a new tool. It's an LLM tool. And the employer has said, this is Claude, and Claude's backend is Amazon, and we're a big Amazon customer, and so we're just rolling this in next to our other Amazon products, and you can just use this. And that could even be a physician using a healthcare version of Claude, walking around, could be on a laptop, could be on his or her phone, maybe in mobile context in a hospital. But you brought up that there could be an advantage, and there's especially a healthcare angle to this, of being able to stand up an LLM on a PC. And so these days I've heard that you need like $1,000 PC. That was one reference point I heard to run one of these. But in someday that'll be a thin executive 2.5 pound laptop that sells for $1,700 instead of a $6,000 PC or whatever. And so is there an advantage to running these things, especially to healthcare? And you mentioned that PHI, that you might have a lower PHI regulatory burden if you do everything on a laptop. But in a hospital or health plan context, isn't that all going to be taken care of by the data's already on an Amazon server or a Microsoft server or something?
I guess the answer is it's complicated, but if you're introducing new third parties, then that's really where the issue is, because you need to, have a BAA with that third party because they could potentially access the data, that sort of thing. So you can work around that, and in fact, you can contract directly to get your own Claude instances or your own OpenAI instances. That is possible. It's expensive, but it is possible. But when I think about from a product perspective or a business perspective, let's go back to Epic, not in a positive way. Sorry, in a positive way this time. This technology allows Epic to say, we don't need to do that. We can embed DeepSeek within Epic itself. So just roll out this feature, and it's running on the computer that the desktop version of Epic is running on right in the office. Your information is entirely stored within Epic and it's never going to any third parties. That's a pretty powerful thing for Epic to be able to do in a way that is not dependent on any external source for third parties for that. And because DeepSeek or open source models that you can run locally are available open source, they can just use that. So when we think about early stage startups and product ideas and everything, the ability to run things on device, on our computers, if we have a healthcare product, that kind of thing, has the potential to be very disruptive to the kinds of projects that we're able to do. So, for example, if I wanted to build an app that was an exercise coach or a hiking coach or that kind of thing, and I'm out and about, I might not have a cell signal. And so that product built on OpenAI is broken. It cannot talk to OpenAI if I don't have if I'm, without a cell signal. But being able to do it on device, and you can run DeepSeek on an iPhone, a lightweight version of the model. And I keep on saying DeepSeek, but there are other models out there, and there will be more. Makes it so that your product always works because it isn't reliant on the servers on the internet. So even without a connection, it can work. So it's going to unlock products that are difficult to deliver as well.
So with our remaining time, Chad, I wanted to let you talk about, you sort of prepared a list of things to talk about. I wanted to give you a chance to cover more of those. And then after that, to address some of the audience questions. And because you have LinkedIn in front of you, you could actually address them directly. But are there other things like areas where GenAI is problematic, et cetera, that you wanted to tell our audience about?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important is, disparities in healthcare access and outcomes can be reinforced by if the models were trained on biased information, then that can be reinforced. And the reason, I think some people might come back with an argument, well, it's just, if that bias was there, why is it any worse if it's reinforcing inherent bias in healthcare outcomes or treatment? And the reason why is, one, we want to be better than that, right? Ideally. But two, what AI allows you to do is do more at scale that would have been unachievable by humans previously. And so if we take a bias that was inherent and we magnify it by doing it faster and quote unquote better, it's actually worse because it magnifies the impact of those biases potentially. So that's one of the problems why, same reason why there's a lot of pitfalls around applying this to clinical problems, because you can run into that. And then when it comes to hallucinations and so say, for example, you wanted to say, here, this person has this problem, these demographics, that kind of thing. Let's generate a treatment plan for them. That could potentially be entirely made up. like it could just be entirely made up. And so without any human review, without physicians actually involved reviewing it, that can be really fraught. But then with AI in general, we have to eventually deal with the consequence of, well, if the system is actually good, but we need human review, but the humans stop paying attention because generally it's good, then they're not going to detect when there's a problem. This is the same thing with sort of self-driving, full self-driving. Like there's this point in time where the humans stop paying attention because it's sort of good enough. But that's when we need people to pay attention, because they need to be able to step in on a moment's notice if they're about to get into an accident. And so the same is true in healthcare. If humans are needed in order to ensure quality, but they stop paying attention because it's generally good enough.
So that's really interesting. I think there have been a lot of examples given. I like the one you gave where a human may be called upon to be always paying attention on the road and be able to step in at a moment's notice to replace an automatic driver. But then if the human is driven for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, then at a certain point, they're not going to be paying as close attention. And so likewise, if doctors have to literally do calculations on a piece of paper to work out a dosage at the bedside, their mind is going to be sharp as to what those ratios and numbers are, and then they're going to have a result, and it looks intuitively like that's the right number, and they're paying attention, and that's work and takes time and is exhausting and that sort of thing. And then if computers do it all the time, and doctors sort of they lose that ability to do that, and then someone gets a wrong dosage because a doctor wasn't wasn't checking it, couldn't intuitively tell that it was right or wrong. And then next, there's actually an intriguing promise here, which is people are talking about that sort of the main qualification for being a doctor today is to have memorized 5 large medical textbooks. And if you can't do that, you can't be a doctor. But in the future, we might want our doctors to be different kinds of people. We might want them to be athletic coaches. We might want them to be the kind of person who would have gone to film school. And they could be that person in the future and not have to be the kind of person who could successfully memorize 5 large medical textbooks. And that sounds very nice. You want your doctor, if you're diagnosed with cancer, to be your coach who's helping you on your journey, who's taking care of your morale, who cares about you. But you also don't want that person to be incapable of doing the math on the dosage, right. As well. So there's a bit of a warning in there.
Right. And I would like to be optimistic, and I generally am. And so eventually you can imagine that the systems get good enough where it's not an issue anymore. Like it's producing good dosage all the time, 100% of the time, better than humans could. Let's be optimistic and say that that's the case. Okay, but what happens when something does go wrong? Right now, all our medical malpractice and everything, like you said earlier, the doctor is responsible. So what happens if we remove the doctor from that entirely? That's a completely untested area right now.
Well, what I'm hearing about this, which is interesting, is that we live in a rich country that has a high-cost healthcare system that produces relatively high-quality results. And there's a critical step that doctors insist on, which is that doctors are always in the loop. So if you get seen by a primary care physician who refers you to a specialist, the specialist orders a special test, the specialist reviews the test, then passes on the results to the primary care physician, who then reviews that and talks to you. Poor countries that have more than half the people in the world in them, and they simply don't have that number. There will never be enough in our lifetimes. If they began a crash course of training radiologists today, there will still not be enough radiologists to offer this service to all of India, by 2060. And so what do we do? And there's an interesting response to this, which is that you may have a primary care physician, and then you may get that radiology exam that is reviewed entirely automatically. It's performed by a technician at a center. In India, it's reviewed entirely automatically and then sent to the primary care physician. Your choice was no exam or an exam that's automatic, reviewed by AI with no radiologist. And then they run that because that's better than nothing. And that gets better and better and better until it is vastly more cost effective than what we have in the Western world. And then the question is, do you travel to India for that superior treatment, or do they allow it into the US, which is itself constrained for radiologists? And then this is called the boomerang. Instead of the first world giving tech to the third world, you have the third world giving their tech back to the first world.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, we only have a few minutes left. Would you be able to take, say, 3 questions from LinkedIn, your favorite 3 questions, and then we'll wind up?
I see statements. Well, Eugene says that AI is not going to succeed if it's simply used to generate more alerts for care providers. Instead, we need to replace charting with an LLM interface, and that's where there's opportunity to provide decision support in line with the existing workflows. And I think that I would second that. I think we touched on that a bit in the conversation. But the thing is, I would also say you've got to start somewhere. And like we were talking about, you start putting AI in clinical scenarios without human involvement. That's a challenge. But if instead you can say, that's really difficult and it's going to take a year to roll that feature out. What if we just help make sure that the person did it right? We can do that, and that'll be live in a few weeks. And I think that's one of the specialties that I've built my sort of career on across all different kinds of products, is saying, how can we move quickly in a highly regulated space to deliver value consistently? And that's the trick in healthcare, is to being able to apply that perspective, and instead of taking years to deliver something, figuring out how to do it more quickly than that.
Very interesting. And I see that that one interesting area of LLMs is for training people and answering questions about internal procedures and policies, especially administrative, non-clinical staff, that sort of thing. So this makes me think about how there are so many kind of universes of knowledge. And so during the Cold War, the Soviet Union had to have its own encyclopedia because it couldn't have its own people, reading Western encyclopedias. But there's also a whole giant world of Wikipedia about Game of Thrones that answers every possible question you could have about Game of Thrones. And so you could have an LLM for every one of these bodies of knowledge. You could have a history of the American Midwest written by Midwest historians who don't like what East Coast historians have written about the history of the Midwest, or other things like that. And so that's really interesting. And that would be a much more accessible and approachable way of distributing this kind of knowledge. And it also could be Amazon's way of onboarding employees to work in their warehouses and providing and the way they do it is different than the way other people do it. So they want to, instead of HR demanding people read a 300-page document and no one does, but they signed they did, and then instead of that, you could have a much more approachable way of conveying the Amazon way of doing things. And that could also be HCA for that matter in a healthcare context. So really interesting to think about defining what goes into and stays out of other people's ways of doing things, stay out of your database that you then apply your LLM to. So in healthcare, I'm also thinking of that you would have certain journals would say, we would count these journals as high quality journals, cutting edge medicine, but these other journals, we don't like them so much. And we think they're shoddy and pursue the wrong path of research. And so we want to keep them out of our high quality database. So very interesting issue there. And this enables a company to do it the company's own way, which could be a competitive advantage to get its employees to memorialize that specialized body of knowledge and get it into the hands of its employees, including new employees.
Yeah. Well, if we have time for one more, Daniel makes a good point, which is a lot of times, when you have a new product or something like that, developers and clinicians, there's a gap between that. I think Daniel is actually a physician and feels that I'm being asked to change to meet the way the computer works. And I think that's one of the exciting things about natural language processing and generative AI capabilities is that it presents an opportunity to do things much more naturally for the doctors, for clinicians. And rather than you needing to change, the software can adapt to the way that you do things and still get value from it and still work in a way that hasn't been possible previously.
That's interesting. So there was always a joke in implementing electronic medical records that the last stage of implementation is called customization. And that does not refer to the act of customizing the software for the employees of the hospital. Instead, it refers to customizing the employees of the hospital for the software. And perhaps with LLMs, we can allow people to sort of work in their own style with the LLM accepting the way that they want to deliver it, but also spotting the gaps and ensuring the gaps get filled if that needs to be the case.
Yep.
Well, that's great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much to our very active, engaged audience. And you've been listening to the Digital Health Investor Talk show with host Stephen Wardell. And many thanks to our guest, Chad Pytel of thoughtbot.
Thank you for having me. And I forgot to mention, if folks like podcasts, they can listen to a podcast where I interview designers, developers, and business people behind the products that we love at giantrobots.fm.
And that podcast, the full name is Giant Robots Crashing Together. Is that
Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots? Yes.
And where did that come from?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it was because we're thoughtbot, and the founders of thoughtbot went to college together, and one of the founders was in a band, and the band name was Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots. So we really liked that name, but the band didn't exist anymore. And so when we came to make our blog and our podcast, we were like, that was an awesome name. Let's reuse.
That's great. Very, very fun. Well, thank you. And we're publishing this show as an episode of the Digital Health Investor Talk show. Subscribe on Apple and Spotify. Don't forget to rate us. We love every 5-star review. And for our Boston audience, our next Boston Health Innovation Night is a week from tonight, Wednesday, February 12th at 5:30 at the Liberty Hotel Bar in Boston, featuring Gil Blander of Inside Tracker talking about health span. Thanks to everyone, and thanks, Chad.
Pleasure.